Hey, friends, welcome back to the Old Fashioned On Purpose podcast. So, today's interview is one I have been excited about for a while. I think we've actually been trying to schedule it since last spring, but this guest and I both have really busy schedules and we just couldn't make it work until now. But it's going to be very worth the wait because this is a topic that is very near and dear to my heart and is also one that's becoming much more in the public eye as of late. So I am so excited to have with me today Diana Rodgers. She is a real food nutritionist who lives on a working farm, and she speaks internationally about the intersection of optimal human nutrition and environmental sustainability. She is also the creator of the Sustainable Dish podcast and the co-author of the film and book that you might have seen, Sacred Cow. It's fantastic. Cannot wait to talk more about this. But welcome, Diana.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. Yeah, and I guess maybe one of the things that's changed in addition to this growing anti-meat narrative
Yeah.
globally is that I no longer live on a
Oh
farm,
no, I should have
actually.
checked my bio with you. So,
No, it's okay. It's all
yeah,
right. I haven't been super public about it, but
sure.
it's no big
Yeah,
deal. Yeah, so it was a huge
I
transition,
bet.
actually, as you might imagine, going from a farm to being divorced from
Mm,
my farmer husband during COVID.
wow.
But now it's just like things are shifting so much with work and with the world and everything. And my kids are about to go off to college. I have one that's 16 and the other's 18. And yeah, it's just like everything's
Yeah,
different.
that is a big shift. I think COVID did that for a lot of people. I mean, obviously it was a change for all of us, but there
Uh-huh.
was a lot of those upheavals that happened. I know with a lot of friends and family
Hmm.
as well. So, yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm just going to dive in because I have lots to ask you. I'm so excited. But
Please
my
do.
first question is more of a one that's kind of from the angle of a fellow content creator and author. How much pushback have you gotten for this book? Like, how has it been to be the creator or the co-creator of this book and that the film that went with it?
um, well, I can tell you, I mean, I used to work for National Public Radio and none of my colleagues would cover this
Yeah.
book. We did not get, we sold enough books to get on the New York Times bestseller list. Didn't happen. There was a little bit of a debacle with Amazon not ordering the number of books that were pre ordered. And so they didn't ship, even though the sales were there. So that was a little frustrating. New York Times wouldn't run anything. So it's been really interesting. I feel like it's definitely a groundbreaking
Yeah.
book. And it's rooted in actual science. Like it's not like an opinion
Right.
piece or something. But unfortunately, being pro meat and pro livestock is a very like political act these days. And I definitely feel like there's just been a lot of pushback challenging people's worldviews and conceptions about meat is definitely something that is right now in this climate very taboo.
Yeah. And just I don't know. I'm in my second book writing process right now, and just reacquainting myself with the publishing industry. And the whole time, it's just interesting the gatekeepers. And it's, yeah, freedom of expression and creativity, but you got to stay within these boxes. And your book doesn't stay within the boxes, which is why I love it so much. And which is why those of you listening, you guys are kind of anti, establishment folks like me. You're going to really like it. But that brings me to my next question. Why are we seeing such a huge anti-meat and especially anti-beef push right now? I mean, I've always been aware of it in the periphery. We had the hardcore vegans or the
Mhm.
PETA people, but all of a sudden, maybe since COVID, maybe it started before that, but it feels like, oh my gosh, it's in our faces 24/7. What's the shift?
Yeah, so the animal rights movement has been slowly brewing for a while, and their main thing was less suffering, no suffering. And of course I'm for that
Yeah,
too, like less suffering, but there is no suffering option in food production, as you know, because all life has to come from death in some way. um, so the difference today is that there's a lot of profits happening in Silicon Valley from these alt meat
mm,
companies. And they are sort of using people who, there's a lot of people that are unfamiliar with how meat is produce or how food is produced overall. They feel guilty about animals dying. They're concerned about climate change. They are worried about their heart health and cancer risk. And it's just this perfect storm of, don't kill beautiful
Mhm.
animals. I don't want to kill the planet, and I don't want to kill myself. And so I'm going to eat a Beyond Burger. And that is just like a perfect package. So, where butter was vilified many years ago and then vindicated on the cover of Time
Yeah.
magazine for being bad for our health, now we've got climate change and um, killing beautiful animals,
Right.
right? So it's like this trifecta of evil that cattle represent.
Yeah, sometimes it's hard to keep track of the how many angles they have on their prongs of, well, it's bad, it's going to kill you because of your heart health, and then it's also hurting the environment, and it's also hurting, it's like they have this multi-prong approach of it's bad, and it's kind of hard to decipher that. I think especially if you're not familiar with farming or ranching or the cattle industry, it's really hard to sort through that. And I understand why a lot of people are being drawn to the Beyond Burgers, because it feels like such a simple alternative, at least how they're portraying
It's
it.
such a,
Yeah.
yeah, I know. And, the thing is they can't win on nutrition.
Yeah.
Beyond Burger, like it's just straight up science biology. It's like not equivalent. Um, they've learned that the pure ethical argument doesn't necessarily work. You need some kind of pseudoscience to pull in there to like
Hmm.
justify it. And so but then in the environmental argument, they can't win on ecosystem function. They can't win on water, on, improving soil health. They can't win on any of that because their products are made from chemical, industrial, monocrop agriculture, which compared to cattle ranching of any form, um, they just can't win,
Right.
right? But what they can win on is people not understanding what carbon cycles are. And so the carbon emissions argument is the one right now. And I've seen that, as you mentioned, I've been all over the place. So in the last year, I've been to Brazil, Australia, New Zealand, and all over the UK. And there are some pretty wacky policies being made right now that are really hurting farmers. And it's all based on people not understanding biogenic carbon cycles and wanting to reduce emissions at all costs. And that is 100% being driven by the alt meat
So even
companies.
worldwide, they're pushing that agenda outside of the United
Oh,
States as well.
yes. I can give you examples. I mean, in New Zealand, which is like pure, they don't really do feedlot finishing. So it's purely pasture based. Um, Farmers are being incentivized by the government to take their land out of farm production and plant trees to offset the carbon emissions from cattle grazing. It makes no sense. And I know it makes no sense to
Yeah.
you, but it makes sense to all the politicians in New Zealand making these policies. And grasslands are better sinks anyway than forests. And these trees are going to get harvested anyway, right?
Right.
So like one day they're going to be
Yeah.
harvested, and they're not even planting native species. They're planting like these monocrop, pine. It makes no
Yeah.
sense. And then in other parts of the world, in the UK, large corporations like airlines are buying farmland, taking it out of farm production for the carbon credit.
Okay.
In Ireland, they're looking at culling about 1 million cattle, which it's going to again be for the emissions, but it doesn't mean demand is going to go down for meat. It just means that the business is going to go to New Zealand or Brazil, but it's going to put all these Irish farmers out of work. So it's really just so unfortunate what I'm seeing everywhere. And it's, again, just all based on just the wrong interpretation of like how nature works.
So then Ireland, they're literally culling or proposing to cull 1 million cattle just to cut like the burping and the methane, or what is that? What is that? What they're that is cut and
Mhm.
dried? What they're saying?
Yeah, right, because what happens in these like emission, like each country has like an emission score
Hmm.
basically. And because Ireland produces so much dairy and beef, Ireland's greenhouse gas emissions are really high because of so much livestock being there. So the only, way they can really make a significant dent is by getting rid of them. But that doesn't take into account the consumption that's happening all over the EU from, they're benefiting from it, but they don't get sort of the tax of the
Yeah.
carbon. But then countries that produce oil, for example, they don't get penalized for the emissions because it's not actually being burned in like Saudi Arabia. It's being burned in other places.
Oh,
And so it makes no
yeah.
sense at all. It's called territorial emissions. But that's what's going on. And everyone's just I call it carbon tunnel vision.
Yeah.
Like all they can think about is carbon, carbon, carbon. But if we really want to reduce all the carbon, then we should all just end our lives right now,
Right.
right? Kill all
Right.
the the life in the ocean. And I mean, like, really, it makes no sense at all. And meat is nutritionally one of the most perfect foods for humans. Their impact on the environment, as you know, is critical in importance. I mean, cattle raised on pasture is the best thing for pasture. You can't have a healthy grassland
Yeah.
without healthy cattle on it.
Can you explain to those listening? Because I know before I read your book and before I really started educating myself, I kind of knew that cows were important for grass, and I kind of knew there was a relation to carbon, but I didn't really understand why. Especially when people started talking about the burps that are
Mhm.
always in the headlines, and I'm like, why
Yeah.
is this in the conversation? And can you explain, in the natural order of things, how ruminants and herbivores help us with that carbon cycle and what role the grassland plays in that?
Yeah, and it might help folks to so I have an illustration in my book, which is like kind of a dense sciencey book, but we did try to write it for, lay regular
Yeah.
people to just understand. So I feel like we try to put a little conversation in there, but the film does a really good job too.
Mm.
We have an animation of this graphic, and on my Instagram, at Sustainable Dish, we also post it there. But if you think about fossil fuels, they are mining deep in the Earth's core for, ancient dead stuff. That's what fossil fuels are. And they're in the process of extracting that and burning it. They're actually injecting brand new CO2 and methane into our atmosphere. And it's mostly CO2. And that lasts about 1,000 years. And we can see that the rise in CO2 levels, um, in our atmosphere directly ties into the Industrial Revolution and the rise of burning of fossil fuels through mostly transportation. Um, in the case of cattle, it's a completely different story because, yes, they're burping out methane as part of their digestive process, but it gets recycled very quickly. It only lasts about 10 years in the atmosphere before it breaks down into H2O, water, and CO2, which the plants are taking up again. So they release O2, oxygen, which is what we breathe, and then the carbon, the C, becomes the grass, becomes the roots, gets fed underground to all the microbes, keeps the healthy soil alive. Up to about 40% of it gets sequestered in the soil through uh, decomposition and building of new soil. And then the cattle eat that grass again, and the whole cycle happens again. And so it all gets churned over. In the case of fossil fuels, it doesn't. It's actually just brand new pollution into our atmosphere. So they should be looked at in very different ways.
That makes sense. And surely, or I mean, I don't know the numbers. Do we have more, at least, or do the projections say that we have more cattle and ruminants now than we would have had, when the buffalo were at their heyday?
I was actually that was gonna be my next thing that I was gonna say. So
Perfect.
we're right in sync. But yeah, in North America, we don't have more cattle than we did before we got rid of all the bison and other native elk and other ruminant animals that we had in North America. So we don't have more net methane emitting livestock or animals in general. We just got rid of the
Yeah.
bison and got rid of all the other like natural wildlife. But cattle are actually performing the same ecosystem functions that the bison did. So we didn't get such a fertile breadbasket in the Midwest
Yeah.
from nothing. Like, it was from bison grazing on that land. They were tall prairies before. And grasslands have to have grazing animals on them in order to be healthy ecosystems. And the Audubon Society has learned this now, and they partner with cattle ranchers for what they call bird friendly grazing, because they've noticed that, with all the corn and soy that's being produced all over the country, we've lost insects, we've lost food for all the migrating birds, and we're losing our bird populations, right? But in the case of healthy grasslands, it actually is habitat for lots and lots of wild species. So it's a very different landscape when you go to, a grassland where there's, beef cattle grazing, but there's also, like, it's teeming with
Mhm.
insects and birds and all kinds of wildlife.
So the argument of, well, if we get rid of the cattle, we all eat lab meat, and then we just leave the grasslands behind a glass wall and just look at them, that's not going to work, because we need the action of the animals to keep things thriving, in essence.
Definitely. So not everywhere wants to be a forest. A lot of
Yeah.
people think, well, we just need to plant more trees, but that's not true. There's a lot of ecosystems that are much healthier as prairies,
Yeah, that's where we are.
or
Yeah.
savannas, and
Yeah.
right. But there's this perception that, well, we got rid of all the trees, and so we need to bring all the trees back, and only forested areas are healthy areas, but that's not true at
Yeah.
all. And this idea that we need to just conserve it and not touch it is also really wrong, because if that grass just grows and there's nothing to chew it and break it down through their guts and poop it out the other end, it's just going to grow. And then what happens to your lawn? It just kind of turns brown and lays over and
Yeah.
dies, right? And that's why everyone has to go back out there with aerators and fertilizers and everything to kind of keep that lawn green. Well, cattle can do the same thing. When they're chewing on the grass, it's the same as cutting the grass, and it actually stimulates the roots to die back, which is part of the process of then um, regenerating and growing deeper roots again in the future. And that's how you build soil, is through the dieback and comeback of the roots. And so in it, when the grass is not grazed and just lies down and oxidizes, the roots die and the plants die. So you actually need to have it chomped on, mowed, and then pooped out the other end, spread around as manure. Cattle are also peeing all over the place, which is moving water all over, so you don't have to, like, irrigate all the time. You can just have cattle on that grass, and it actually holds the moisture better when it's healthy soil.
Absolutely. Yes. I have seen that. What or I came across a statistic, maybe it was in your book, maybe it was somewhere else, I can't remember, and it basically said that the amount of emissions that we get from rotting and wasted food is higher than that is produced by animal agriculture in the United States. Is that true, or did I remember that incorrectly?
So I don't know the exact emissions difference. If Well, here's an interesting thing that I recently learned, is that for every pound of plant-based protein, you have 4 pounds of waste.
Hmm.
That's pretty
Okay.
incredible, right? So let's picture soybean protein powder. You have all the soybean hulls and the plant fibers and all that kind of stuff. So we can either put that in a pile and let it emit methane and just kind of break down slowly, or we can feed it to a cow, in addition to its ration on a feedlot, and upcycle that into, again, the most perfect food for humans. And that's why I'm not, like, completely anti feedlot
Mm-hmm.
beef. So I advocate for regenerative agriculture and for healthy grazing systems and everything. But I also see a place for feedlot beef, because it's actually upcycling. It's not like 100% corn that they're eating when they're on a feedlot. They're getting this balanced mix, and a lot of what they're getting has no other use in our food system, and we can't feed it to chickens or pigs because they're
Yeah.
monogastric, and so they can't eat that fiber stuff. But we can feed it to cattle, and it's really the only use we have for that. And so they can take cottonseed hulls and soy hulls and all the leftover junk from the ethanol industry, corn husks, and they can turn that into meat,
Mm.
which is amazing. And so it's actually quite an efficient process. And I know people think, oh, but feedlots are such miserable, horrible places. That's 3 months of the animal's life that they're there. 85% of our total beef herd right now in America is grazing on land that we can't crop.
Right.
And so that's pretty amazing too. A lot of people don't realize that, if we take the cows away, it doesn't mean we just have more space for soy
Yep.
protein. We don't. And so in rangeland areas, probably like Wyoming, I'm
Yeah.
imagining a lot of that is not suitable for cropping. They call it non-arable, but you can graze it. And so it's a perfect use of that land.
Yeah. We're absolutely in that position here. It is a monumental effort to grow vegetables or even trees. Like trees are unnatural here to a certain extent. And I have some trees in my yard, but I have to work really, really hard to get them to grow. But what grows is grass and the cattle. Like this is cattle country. And when I think about, even if you wanted to turn this into grain, commercial monocrop grain production, like you couldn't do it. There's not enough water. Um, and there's farmers with pivots for like different things in they're kind of scattered around, but there's always that question of there's just not enough water. And so Wyoming would be, or a lot of Wyoming would be worthless without the cattle to convert that grass into protein.
Yeah, and the vilification of cattle also means the destruction of rural
Yeah.
economies because farming is the backbone of rural America. And what I see now when I drive down, I mean, Georgia is a really good example. I'm doing a workshop at White Oak
Mm,
Pastures next week,
sweet.
actually. And it's in the poorest county of the whole country. And the town, Bluffton, Georgia, where Will Harris lives, was completely like all the farming, like there's not much left,
Yeah.
right? And you see that. I mean, a lot of people can relate to just driving through like any town USA, and it's all now like big box stores. All the mom and pop stores are gone, and so you definitely can find a Walmart or a Cracker Barrel or any one of
Yeah.
these like Olive
Yeah.
Gardens, right? I mean, they're just everywhere, absolutely everywhere. And it's really sad that um, small business owners are being pushed out. And it really has to do with the fall of
Hmm.
farming, with the fall of animal agriculture and the consolidation of, dairy and beef and everything else.
Yeah, absolutely. I see that here in our area where, I mean, the people who are here still making it are ranchers. But there's a lot less than there used to be around the turn of the century. Even just looking at old newspapers, you can see where they had like creameries here and all sorts of places where people were bringing butter and meat and milk. And now that's all gone because everyone drives to the store and gets those things. And the ranchers where there was dozens of them, now there's just a few big ones who bought up everybody else. So it's changed a lot.
Yeah, when I interviewed Dr. Allen Williams for my film, he was saying that in his county in Mississippi, there used to be 500 small dairy
Oh my
farms,
goodness.
and now there's not
Yeah.
one. There's not one.
Yeah.
But one of the great things is with the resurgence of some of these new more hands-on farming techniques, like what I've seen at White Oak Pastures. He now, converted the old mercantile store that was completely broken down. It is now like White Oak Pastures, heartbeat of the town. Everyone eats lunch
Nice.
there. There's a restaurant. His office is the old jailhouse.
Yep.
He took the old church that nobody was using and turned it into an education center. He has provided so many jobs for so many people. And it's really this like alive, vibrant heartbeat again of this portion of the US that was completely dying.
Yeah, it's bringing it back. I love that. So, where was I? I had a question. I left my brain. Hold on. It was a
That's
good
okay.
question. I'm sure it'll come back. Whatever it was. Um, oh, so you mentioned feedlots, and that does make sense when you think of it like that. Like if we're going to be producing the grains and the soy, we might as well be putting those waste products to use versus letting them rot in a pile. Um, And that brings me to the question of grass fed meats or grass finished meats versus grain finished. And that was a part of your book that really surprised me. So can you kind of give the rundown for the audience? Because I know we have a lot. I mean, I
Yes.
love grass finished. That's what we raise and sell. And I know a lot of my audience is the same. What's your thought? What does the
Yes.
science say about that?
Yeah. So, listen, I did not want or even think that this was going to be the answer. Okay. And I see a place now for feedlot finished beef in our food system. It's affordable. It's using food waste and
Mm-hmm.
upcycling it into great food that's going to feed a lot of people. And I'm a dietitian and a mother. I can't believe what's happening like in the New York City public schools, right? With like vegan
Yeah.
Fridays, meatless Mondays. That is not science-based at all. And 70% of those kids are nutritionally insecure.
Yes.
And so now we've got them going home to, food deserts on the weekends, and we're going to take meat away on Mondays and
Yeah.
Fridays. Like that was the healthiest part. That burger patty, even if it was feedlot finished or
Yeah.
whatever, that was still the healthiest part of the school
Right.
lunch. When you look at like the roll and the bag of chips and, chocolate milk that
Yeah.
they had to go with it,
Yeah.
right? So,
And that part of your book, I had not.
so I eat a lot
Go
of.
ahead. Didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
Oh,
I
go
just
ahead.
think that part of your book
No,
where you did bring
please.
up that the nutritionally insecure population, how much it is hurting them because they're getting the brunt of, oh, just eat more potato chips, just eat more bread, just eat more rolls. Like it's killing them. We're really hurting them, and it's all off of this policy that's making the elites kind of feel better, but it's really hurting them. I never thought of that way before I read the book.
That's why I really don't like this message of less meat, better
Yeah,
meat, because less than what? What happens when people eat less meat? As a dietitian, I'm actually very pro protein and think that
yeah,
people, need to be eating more protein, because when you eat more protein, especially animal source protein, regardless of it's feedlot or grass finished, you're gonna eat less of everything else
yeah,
because you're gonna feel more full. So I'm hoping what your listeners are hearing is that it shouldn't be, well, I couldn't find a grass fed steak, so I ate a
yeah,
bagel,
yeah,
right? Or a bag of chips or something like that, or a bar. Do the best you can. If you want to support your local farmer, and you don't have a lot of money, go for some organ meats or some, maybe ground instead. That's cheaper. Um, but if you're just in the grocery store and you're debating between chicken, pork, or beef, and there's no grass fed to be found, I'm drinking some
it's
seltzer.
okay.
I just
The bubbles are getting
burped a little bit.
over.
Excuse me. um, if there's no grass fed beef to be found, beef is still the best choice of those three. And here's why: it's 30% more nutritious than chicken. And those chickens and pigs raised industrially are 100% indoors, eating only grain their whole life, right? That cow that was finished on a feedlot still started at a calf cow operation, probably in Wyoming or
Mm-hmm.
Montana. Only spent about 3 months on being finished on a feedlot, and they could still walk around. They weren't like caged up like the conditions that you really see in chicken and pork. And they are upcycling food that doesn't compete with us for nutrition into the most nutrient dense food you can eat. Okay, so now we get to, is grass fed better than feedlot
Mm-hmm.
finished? And I looked at all of the existing research, and what I found was not significantly. And people say, well, it's the omegas. And when you really look at the profile of fats, like in a steak, what you see is that I don't, is this a video
It is.
podcast or
It is
just
video.
audio?
Surprise!
Okay,
It's video.
so I'm holding up my hand. I'm holding up my hand. Like, let's say the circle of my hand is all the fats, like a pie chart,
Mm-hmm.
right? Almost 50-50 is saturated and monounsaturated.
Okay.
And so omegas are polyunsaturated. It is like the tiniest little sliver of the pie chart
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to the total fats in a steak. And so twice as much omega 3 would still be like 2 hairs
Okay.
of the pie chart, right? So it's like saying that 2 pennies is twice as much money as 1 penny, but
Yeah.
it's still
Not
like
much.
I'm not gonna go after 2 pennies to get my money for the
Yes.
day,
Yes.
right? So you would still need to eat 8 pounds of grass-fed beef to get the same omega-3s you would get in a 3-ounce piece of salmon.
Mm.
So, yes, in some studies we did see more omega-3s, but it's like saying organic carrots are a better source of protein. No one's eating carrots for
Sure.
protein. They're eating carrots for other
Yeah.
reasons, right? And so to say, well, only eat the grass-fed beef for the omega-3s is like not really an argument. There's some new research coming out talking about polyphenols and other compounds, and it does look like, the more diverse the forage, the more interesting kind of compounds that these animals have in their meat. And, that's fascinating. I still think, though, one, we don't know what like the daily requirement is of polyphenols. So it's hard to say, well, you're going to get, 500% of your daily requirement of whatever this compound is that we don't really know much
Yeah.
about. And I still like when I look at the overall American population with 60% of our calories coming from ultra processed garbage, I'm just trying to get people to eat real food.
Yes.
Like just go to get some carrots. They don't have, and no doctor would ever say only eat organic carrots or don't eat carrots, right? They would
True.
say like
Yeah.
choose choose organic if you can find it. If it's good, definitely do that. But otherwise, it's okay to just, like, eat a salad too. Like, it doesn't have to be 100% organic all the time. That's the same message that I have with meat. So, if you have access and you have the money, please support the rancher that is up the street from you doing great practices. But if you're a single mom working in a
Yeah.
city, can't make it to the farmer's market, really trying to just make sure your kids get the nutrition they need, there are vital nutrients in that steak that you cannot get or are very hard to get from plants, like iron and B12. And we know that food insecure kids do better when they have meat. So that's the solution for that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think I hope that's really reassuring for a lot of people because I think there is that, especially in the homesteading world or the whole food world, like has to be grass finished. And I mean, I love grass finished. We sell grass finished. I think it's amazing. But if you can't afford that, then at least eat, like you said, eat beef versus a bagel or potato chips. It's going to be better for you in the long run. And really, I mean, better for the environment too, right? Because the potato chips and the bagels are the monoculture, mass-produced fossil fuel crops. So just even feedlot beef is going to be more sustainable, even if it's not grass finished, right?
I've really come around, like even since researching the book, because I definitely used to be like eat grass fed for omegas, and I think it kind of I had to check my own
Mm-hmm.
worldviews and biases and everything because you want something to be true
Yeah.
and you hear it so much. And I go to Weston A price conferences and I just wanted it to be the right thing. And it is the right thing, but there's also just more complexity and
Mm-hmm.
nuance to the story than I knew about initially. Interestingly, grass fed dairy is significantly
Mm.
better. And that's because there's more fat to begin with in dairy.
Ah,
Like when you eat a steak, it's mostly
yeah,
protein, right? And the differences are in the fats, but people don't really eat like tallow by the
sure.
spoonfuls. Most
Sure.
people I
Most
know
people,
don't,
yeah.
right? But when it comes to dairy and cheese and yogurt and all that kind of stuff, there is a lot more fat percentage than protein when you're eating it. And it does make a difference in dairy. It makes a difference also in eggs. There's a
Ah,
lot of fat in
so would it
eggs.
be omegas
And
in
so,
both dairy and eggs then that we're talking about that would be coming through, or is it a different part of the fat?
it's
Okay.
omegas. Yep, it's omegas, and it's also more fat soluble vitamins like vitamin A, um, vitamin K2 in the case
Yeah.
of dairy. So you're just getting more healthy stuff
Okay.
basically. But yeah, it's mostly the omegas that you would see the difference in. So I do encourage people to, if they can justify the extra cost for those pastured eggs, to get
Yeah.
them and to try to get the grass-fed dairy when they
Okay.
can.
That's good to know. It helps to prioritize, I think, um, in those things.
Yeah.
Yeah, when the budget's tight too. Okay,
Yeah.
so we know that we've kind of balanced out this idea of how beef can help the environment. What about the
Mhm.
people who are like, okay, that's nice, but it's still going to give you heart disease and cancer? Good old red meat is bad
Right.
for you argument.
Well, that's the easiest argument to
Okay.
win because it's just not. So the science is pretty clear that, you know, those studies that are vilifying meat are not um, randomized controlled trials. They're not experiments where they take, one population of people and put them in a metabolic ward and make them eat one diet and then a whole nother group for 30 years and follow them. And the only difference is steak. And they've locked them up for 30 years. And like that, that's just not what's
Yeah.
happening. So what these studies are, they might look at a group like the Seventh-day Adventists, right, who are largely
Mm,
vegetarian. So they might look at Seventh-day Adventists compared to a typical American, right? Seventh-day Adventists don't smoke or drink. They have a strong sense of community. There's like all kinds of other stuff going on in the Seventh-day Adventist community in addition to the fact that they don't eat meat,
yeah.
right? Compared to Joe Six-pack American who, doesn't exercise a lot. I mean, your typical vegetarian exercises more, takes supplements, eats fresh fruits and vegetables, like all the other things that you and I probably advocate for just from a healthy lifestyle
Yeah.
perspective. So when they adjust for all of those, they find no difference at all. And there was one study that looked at health food store shoppers. So therefore, it's like kind of adjusting for similar lifestyle with people who shop at a health food store. And what they found is absolutely no difference at all between being an omnivore and being a vegetarian.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Yeah, which I mean, man, basic science, like I teach my kids that when we're doing experiments. You have to pick one factor and isolate it for you,
One
one variable,
variable.
and that's how you, okay. So we didn't do that. Interesting. Okay. Um,
Yeah.
I've noticed, well, I'm not carnivore, but I have a lot of friends who are following the carnivore diet. And it's just interesting to see, especially for those with really, with like the autoimmune issues and things like that, how much they're clearing up by eating a more meat heavy diet. It's quite fascinating. Like I
Hmm.
said, we're not carnivore, but we do try to, I'm always like telling my kids protein, protein, protein. And it's amazing how much different we feel. Um, I feel like, I mean, that's just sort of, my anecdotal evidence, but I notice it.
No, I feel best when I get like 140 grams of protein
Yeah.
a day, which is way more than anyone who comes to me for my nutrition practice eats. And it's hard to get that much, but I feel really amazing when I
Yeah.
do.
And when I don't get it, it's weird because I don't crave things at night. Like I don't really do a lot of potato chips, but if I don't get enough protein during the day, 8 o'clock comes around and I get this insatiable craving for potato chips and crack like carbs, like bad carbs. And I'm like, fascinating. So yeah,
Hmm.
it's interesting.
Yeah, and some people crave those and other people crave sweet stuff. It really
Yeah.
depends on like I'm definitely a salty
Yeah.
potato chip kind of person. And so I try not to even like have them in my
Yeah.
house, but sometimes, I have
Yeah.
teenagers like I mentioned earlier, and so sometimes they make their way in whether I bought them or not. But other people will crave like ice cream and sweet candies and things like that too. And a lot of those cravings go away when you've met your total
Yeah.
protein, and that's this protein leverage hypothesis. So, this idea that we all have this protein threshold that we have to meet throughout the day. And if we don't meet it by the end of the day, we're still looking for any way of possibly getting as much, protein as possible. And that ends up being weird cravings for foods that are
Yes.
not as good
Yep.
for us.
Been there, done that more than once. So,
Hmm.
um, okay. Sorry, the dings going off. I don't know if you can hear that. Can you hear that? The dings? No. Okay,
Nope.
good. It's just me. My computer's making noises. I'm glad you can't hear it. Anyway, all right. Um, one argument that I hear come up a lot with the whole beef subject is they go, cool, cool, that's nice that you're doing your regenerative farming, but that won't feed the world and we have a hunger crisis. So how do we address that?
Yes. So hunger is a political and food distribution issue. It is not a food production issue. We are producing more than enough food for
Mm,
everybody. It's just not getting into everybody's hands, and those are very complicated reasons why
Yes.
it's not. Has nothing to do with food production. So that's A, number
Mhm.
one. But secondly, in the book, I do go through the numbers, and we do have the land, it seems, to grass finish all of our cattle. So, as I mentioned before, almost all of our cattle is grass fed. They just are spending the last 3 months of their life on feedlots. Um, so, do we have the land in the US to take those last 3 months, and they would have to live a little longer because they would need extra time, because that's one of the magics of feedlots,
Yes.
right? Is that it finishes them so quickly. But yes, we there are benefits to regenerative agriculture in that it actually makes the land more productive. You can actually increase the what they call the carrying capacity, or the number of animals you can have on a piece of land, because the soil is so healthy and it's actually producing such more diverse, healthy, grasses and other plants that are on that land. So that's one. So it's just more productive. Two, there's CRP land, so
Mhm.
farmers are being paid to keep their land fallow. So we could be grazing that, and we can also do intercropping grazing, like after you harvest the corn, for example. Instead of plowing it, you can actually just move grazing animals in, and they can graze the rest of that, fertilize it, and turn it into protein. So that's an amazing thing. And also ethanol. We need to stop with ethanol. So we're burning fossil fuels to grow renewable. It just makes
Yeah.
no sense at all. So so we need to stop with this excessive corn production and instead just graze the animals on that land.
How much of our corn crop in North America is going towards ethanol versus other human food or animal food?
It's a large percent of I can't remember off the top of my head. I know I have the number in the book, so I don't wanna
Yeah, no worries.
misquote it,
Okay.
but
I'll go look
it's
in the book.
a shocking I feel like it's about 30%,
Okay.
but I don't
Yeah,
quote me on that.
that's a
It's in the
lot.
book.
Okay.
Mhm.
So, with the current farm paradigm, this using so many fossil fuels and tilling the soil and damaging the soil structure and the soil nutrients, and then we're pouring more fertilizers on it. With that current modern model, which I mean, everyone, we're taught that's normal and this is how we do things now. How much longer can that keep going? Because I feel like when people are coming after beef, they're acting like this is just the alternative that is just the way it is and the way it will be. But can this keep itself propped up indefinitely?
Um, yeah, so there are people that say that, we only have 60 harvests left, according to the United Nations. And I actually, when I was writing the book, wanted to find the source of that, like exactly where's their
Yeah.
evidence for this. And so I went back and I looked, and I actually found out that it is a quote from an employee of the United Nations, and she said it kind of off the cuff
Okay.
at a conference to somebody. Like, we only have 60 harvests
Yeah.
left. Like, not like in this sort of official stance with like
Sure.
actual
Sure.
data. So whether or not it's 60 or 50 or 100, it's not much longer. And there's been books written about civilizations that have farmed themselves to death because they ruined all the soil. We are definitely headed in that direction too.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah. It's concerning. Also, it feels like there is such a, I wouldn't say easy alternative, but a logical alternative that is just a matter
Mhm.
of education. How else can, as we wrap this up, how else can people like me or the podcast listeners, what can we do to help this? I mean, if someone can't raise a steer in their backyard, what other steps can they take to not only make sure their family has better quality food, but also just help with soil regeneration and just that general awareness?
Yeah. So in the back of the book Sacred Cow, we do have like what can you do?
Okay.
And the first is, be sustainable and take care of your own health, right? So don't be a burden on our healthcare system. And it's funny because we saw people who weren't as healthy really suffer a lot more from COVID than other people. And I'm not saying that it's their fault or
Yeah.
anything like that, but if you're not overweight and metabolically broken, it's sort of like you're not doing American
Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
right? Like the food landscape we have in this country is horrific. And so if you're not one of these wackos like us that are, really into natural
Yeah.
foods and like making stuff from scratch, like that's a radical
Yes.
thing. But if you're not radical, you're broken. And it's not their fault, right? They're being taught that that's
Yep.
normal and it's not normal. Um, and so we have kind of a nutrition plan that you can follow that basically is, eat less, no, less processed foods. Kind of like a 30-day challenge, and then, 80-20, like live in the real world, but like
Yeah.
the majority of your life, you really do need to be kind of a radical person. Um, and then we have other things you can do as far as keeping yourself out of debt.
Mhm.
Um, living within your means, just not, the whole
Yep.
consumerism thing. And then supporting farmers, supporting just regional food systems in general, and trying to like get away from the centralized food systems. And then I started a nonprofit called the Global Food Justice Alliance, where that's funding me to go around the world and speak at all these conferences and tell these governments, like in New Zealand, this is crazy. You should not be taking farmland out of production and planting trees here. This makes no
Yes.
sense. So I've been flying around the world. I'm about to. Well, I have White Oak Pastures coming up, and then after that, I'll be in Dublin for the International Meat Summit, where we're going to be putting together a scientific series of scientific papers that are going to be published in Animal Frontiers in 2023, and it's going to be the definitive science on meat,
Nice.
nutrition, environment, ethics, and economics, livelihoods.
Fantastic.
So I'm really excited about that. So people can join my Patreon, Global Food Justice, or support me through that website. And that I'm really kind of the only one that's pushing back. There's a few other academics that are out there speaking about this kind of stuff, but everyone else just seems to be completely sold on this bandwagon of less meat for the
Yeah.
planet, more processed garbage, fake foods, and they're just buying it. And I feel like I need like an earth-size megaphone to like shake everybody out of this mindset and let them know that they're going down the wrong path.
Well, I, for one, am grateful that you're doing it. I know it takes a lot of bravery because to go against the flow and being the lone voice in the wilderness. So thank you for putting yourself out there. I know you get a lot of criticism, but we need people like you who are willing to put themselves out there to get the truth and get the science to the masses because they're not hearing the truth. So Global Food Justice
Yeah.
Alliance we'll send people there.
Mhm.
Y'all have a podcast too, right? Sustainable Dish podcast. Is that still going? Okay.
Yep, Sustainable Dish
Okay, awesome.
podcast, yep.
And then Diana also is Sustainable Dish on Instagram too, right? Yeah, that's right.
And then they can
Okay.
if they want the book, it's
Yes.
available everywhere, Sacred Cow.
So good.
And then the film is, the best place to find it is probably Amazon, or if you have one of those smart TVs, you can just say Sacred Cow. My
Fancy.
kids showed me how
I
to
don't know
do
how to
that.
do that.
And it just, like, shows
Okay.
up.
I type it in like old school. I do technology to a point and then I don't do it anymore. But yeah, we watched it with the kids. It was excellent.
Yeah,
It was
so
so good. Um,
th
yeah.
thank you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate
Absolutely.
you
This was
having me on.
fantastic. Thank you for answering all my questions. And yeah, I wish you so much success in the next few months as you're flying and traveling and spreading the good news. So keep it up.
Th Thank you. Thanks a lot. Have a great day.